The moment I shut down the last distribution node, the silence hit louder than a bomb. Semis lined up on the outskirts of their precious gated community sat idle, their engines cooling in the afternoon sun, while HOA board members paced behind their ornamental fences like rats, realizing the ship had sunk. Karen, the president with her surgically frozen smile and an attitude sharper than barbed wire, screamed into a phone on her perfectly pruned front lawn. But no calls would help her now, I had made sure of it. Their food supply was done. Done because of a $5 fine. A fine I didn't owe. A fine they weaponized. Now tell me, what would you do if someone tried to evict you from your own farm over a fine that wouldn't even cover a cup of coffee? Completely unaware you own the entire food chain that feeds their overpriced suburban lives? It started with a flimsy envelope taped to my front gate, fluttering in the wind like it had something important to say. The paper was cheap, the ink smudged, and the logo at the top, the seal of the Meadowlark Crest HOA, looked like it had been printed off a kindergarten printer. Notice of violation, it read, in bold self-righteous font. Violation. Failure to remit trash disposal surcharge in the amount of $5. That was it. $5. No explanation, no prior notice, no invoice leading up to it. Just a passive-aggressive threat, stapled to my fence like I was a delinquent tenant, instead of the sole owner of the largest producing farmland in the county. I chuckled. At first, $5? I figured it was a clerical hiccup. Some automated system hiccuped. I called the HOA office the next morning. A voice answered, monotone, unimpressed, and said, "That issue's already escalated, sir. You're on non-compliance status now." I blinked. "For $5? I asked. She repeated the phrase like it was carved into law. Non-compliance. That word echoed, bouncing between my ears louder than it had any right to. The next envelope was thicker, hand-delivered by a pale teenager in a branded golf cart who couldn't even look me in the eye. It outlined my continued refusal to remedy outstanding dues and cited subsection 14B of their newly revised Residential Consistency Initiative. According to them, the farm had been incorrectly designated as a primary residence zone B, when it was, in fact, in a dual utility buffer zone. Translation? They claimed I wasn't allowed to live on my own damn farm. It was insane. I'd lived here for 15 years. Built this place from the dirt up. Installed the irrigation systems. Ran the harvest trucks. Signed every contract with my own ink. My bedroom was 50 feet from my equipment shed. My shower was across from a rack of high-yield heirloom seed trays. I lived here because this land wasn't just dirt to me. It was legacy. But to the HOA, it was paperwork. And I had apparently filled out the wrong box. I called again. This time, I got a woman who introduced herself as Karen Barnstone, HOA president. Her voice dripped with forced politeness and veiled threat. "Mr. Holt," she said, "while we respect your attachment to the land, your failure to resolve this violation has escalated to the point where the board had no choice but to act. You are, unfortunately, in breach of residential ordinance alignment." I asked her what that meant in plain English. "It means," she said, "you have 72 hours to vacate the premises or face legal proceedings." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I had no words. "Over $5? I asked. "Sir," she said curtly, "this is not about $5. This is about structure, order, compliance. The board has spoken." Click. That's when the notices started showing up daily. Threats dressed as administrative letters, fines for non-residency zone violation, refusal to vacate, ongoing domestic presence without permit. The language got more bizarre every time, like they were reaching into a thesaurus for new ways to say, "Get out." My mailbox began to look like a slot machine for stupidity. But it wasn't just the paper. 3 days after that call, I heard the rumble of tires crunching gravel at the far gate. 2 HOA board members, flanked by a man with a clipboard and the expression of a low-tier bounty hunter, rolled up in a branded van marked Compliance Team. They didn't get out. They just sat at the gate, eyeing my house, jotting things down. That night, A sign appeared just outside my fence. This property is under HOA dispute. Residents may be in violation. I pulled it out of the ground and burned it. But it didn't matter. The machine was in motion. A week later, they convened a board meeting, closed doors, no notice, and passed a motion banning me from full-time residence. Failure to comply will result in forced removal by municipal authority. They printed that on letterhead like they owned the sheriff's badge. That's when I knew this wasn't about a fee. This wasn't about zoning. This was a power play. Karen, who had only risen to president after the last one was mysteriously voted out in a 3-2 special session, wanted to make an example. And I was the target. She started calling me the squatter. At a community cookout, one of my own suppliers told me she had joked about my little dirt kingdom and how men like that need to be reminded that the HOA owns more than he thinks. But that's where she was wrong. Because I own everything she depends on. Every vine-ripened tomato that hits her overpriced organic market, every egg in her refrigerator stamped with a local label, every piece of grass-fed beef stocked in her boutique butcher, it all traces back to me. My farm, my contracts, my network, through 3 LLCs and a silent share in the regional agri-coup, I control 83% of the food flow into this county, and I've never flaunted that. Never needed to. I preferred being the quiet guy with dirty boots and clean crops, but Karen was about to find out the difference between owning a piece of paper and owning everything it feeds. I didn't retaliate. Not yet. I did something worse. I complied, on the surface. I moved a cot into my barn, shifted my mailing address to a P.O. box, let them believe I was bending, let Karen smirk at her little win. Meanwhile, I took stock. Not of seeds or feed, of people. The truckers who ran routes through my distribution depots, the warehouse clerks who packed grocery pallets with my produce, the mid-tier managers who oversaw school lunch deliveries sourced directly from my land. I met with every one of them in the span of 6 days. Quiet lunches, off-record chats. One question: what happens if I flip the switch? Every one of them gave me the same answer. The whole system halts. Good. Let the HOA flex. Let them send more letters. Let them gloat about a man being forced off his own land over a 5 error, because every time they opened their mouths, they put more nails in their own coffin. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to wait. They thought this was a turf war. But turf doesn't grow without soil, and I own the soil. They came for me just after dawn. 3 of them. Matching windbreakers with private community enforcement, stitched on the back in peeling white letters, walking in tight formation like they'd just stepped out of a mall cop fever dream. Their SUV idled at the base of my driveway, headlights on, even though the sun was already cresting over the hills and burning the dew off my wheat fields. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, boots planted on my own boards, watching them approach like they were the law. One of them, the one with mirrored aviators and a clipboard, held out a laminated document. "Mr. Holt," he announced, "we've been sent by the Meadowlark Crest Homeowners Association to initiate your removal from the premises." I didn't say a word. I just looked at him like he'd asked to borrow my lungs. "You're in violation of Ordinance 14B, and under order of the Compliance Board, you are to vacate your living quarters immediately or face legal repercussions." I took a sip of my coffee, slow, letting the silence stretch. "You 3 realize this isn't a condo complex," I finally said. "This is a working agricultural production site, protected under federal farm land use policy." The one with the clipboard blinked. That phrase hadn't been in his training manual. "You'll need to come with us, sir," he said, less sure this time. "This isn't optional." That's when I laughed. One bark of dry amusement that seemed to knock the wind out of their intimidation act. "You're trespassing," I said, cool and flat. "I've got your vehicle plate, your badge numbers, if those are even real, and security footage from 3 angles. I suggest you leave now or spend your afternoon explaining to county deputies why 3 HOA mall cops are executing a forced eviction on sovereign agricultural land." For a long second, they didn't move. Then one of them, the younger guy, maybe barely 20, muttered something and turned back toward the SUV. The others followed. No apology, no goodbye. Just retreat. And a camera in the passenger window, catching every frame of me, refusing lawful compliance. That clip hit the HOA newsletter within 48 hours. Edited and overlaid with dramatic music. Slowed down to make me look like I was lunging. They added captions. Belligerent farm occupier confronts community safety officers. Karen narrated the voiceover herself. This man has consistently ignored safety regulations, failed to honor HOA obligations, and endangered our community with erratic, anti-institutional behavior. Her voice was syrup and venom. She stood in front of a green screen with the HOA logo spinning behind her like a Department of Justice seal. "We're doing everything we can," she said with a sigh, "to restore order. But some people just think they're above the law." The newsletter circulated to every resident and affiliate community. Then it leaked. Local news stations ran with it. My face plastered over chyrons. Local farmer turned sovereign? HOA. Under siege by anti-compliance extremist? I even made a satirical segment on a late-night show dubbed Farmer $5. Karen loved it. At the next town hall, she doubled down. "Mr. Holt has a history of threatening behavior," she claimed to a room full of folding chairs and fearful neighbors. "We've received reports of hoarding supplies, stockpiling unlicensed vehicles, and suspicious nocturnal activity, all of which point to the need for a full-scale investigation," the whispers started. Parents kept their kids from riding bikes past my property. Drones hovered a little longer than they used to. HOA patrols started checking perimeters, even setting up a fake weigh station near my gate to monitor supply traffic. They trespassed. Walked into my barn under the pretense of inspecting for fire code violations. Photographed my irrigation systems. Jotted down license plates of delivery trucks. One morning, I found 3 of them standing in my greenhouse, pointing at my tomato beds and murmuring into radios like they'd stumbled onto a cartel operation. I filmed them all, every inch of their intrusion. My security system streamed 24/7, motion sensors, infrared, cloud backups. I uploaded every encounter to a secure folder, time-stamped, cross-referenced with copies of every letter, every memo, every second of footage they'd weaponized against me. They thought they were burying me in paper, but I was building an arsenal. What Karen and her clipboard cronies didn't know was that I wasn't some backwoods hermit playing with tractors. I was a decorated logistics engineer, formerly contracted by FEMA to redesign post-disaster food mobilization across 3 states. After Katrina, after the California fires, after the Mississippi floods, I was the one who helped reroute the chaos. I know how systems break, and more importantly, I know how to build them. My current network was a spiderweb of shell corporations, distribution fronts, and co-op partnerships. You wouldn't see my name unless you dug deep. But I owned the shipping depots, the cold storage, the harvesting rights. My company, Suncrest Syndicate, supplied nearly every mid-level grocer in a 200-mile radius. And it wasn't just produce. It was meat, dairy, canned goods, shelf-stable grains. My influence stretched from feedlot to freezer aisle. Still, I stayed quiet. Let Karen play her game. She leaked a doctored photo of me wearing a camo jacket next to a broken-down truck, said it was evidence of militia sympathies, claimed my farm was a haven for anti-government survivalists, even tried to report me to the Department of Agriculture. That went nowhere. I had a friend in the regional office who laughed so hard he had to call me personally. "She said you were trying to raise genetically weaponized squash," he said between wheezes. "What the hell is this HOA smoking?" I told him I didn't know, but I had a feeling they'd overdose soon. The deeper Karen dug, the more she exposed her ignorance. She sent in a team to assess the threat level of my grain silos, not realizing those silos were storing emergency rations for the county's disaster relief plan. A plan she herself had signed onto 2 years prior when it helped the HOA secure a resilience grant. That was my contract, my logistics, my supplies. They were eating from my table while trying to cut off my hands, and still, I said nothing. I just documented every drone flyover, every time their inspectors crossed a property line without a warrant, every instance of slander or character defamation published under the HOA letterhead. I backed it all up, filed it under Asset Realignment Phase 1, and waited. Because what they didn't understand was that every violation they threw at me wasn't just harassment. It was leverage, proof of intent, evidence of a coordinated abuse of authority. Karen thought she was playing politics. I was building a civil RICO case. My neighbors, most of whom kept their heads down during the worst of it, started whispering their support. Notes left in my mailbox. Envelopes of photos showing HOA agents nosing around their property too. One older rancher even showed up with a USB drive full of surveillance footage and a bottle of whiskey. They came after my niece for having a non-regulation doghouse color, he muttered. Said it disrupted visual continuity. I told them to go to hell. But you might actually do something. I nodded. Took the drive. Added it to the growing pile. The media was still parroting HOA talking points. But cracks were forming. One independent journalist reached out. Asked for a tour of the property. I declined. Not yet, I said. Because this wasn't the moment for press conferences. This was the moment to listen, to gather, to let them feel invincible. Every move Karen made from her overpriced bungalow, every smug press release or town hall decree, she thought it was domination. But it was actually just confession. And when the day came, I'd let her confess everything. On record, on paper, with the full weight of the very systems she thought she controlled crashing down around her like a collapsing grain tower. Until then, I stayed quiet, kept my boots on the soil, and smiled every time another HOA drone flew overhead, knowing damn well it was capturing the calmest man on earth standing in the eye of the storm he had already started. Karen crossed the line in the third week of September, not with another flyer, or a trespassing inspector, or some junior security clown with a clipboard. No, this time, she went for the throat. She filed an official petition with the county zoning board demanding an emergency audit of all agricultural land use permits tied to my parcel. Her claim? That I had been operating an unregistered distribution hub and illegally storing commercial quantities of perishables in violation of county health codes. To anyone else, it would have sounded like an overreach. Another Karen power trip. But she timed it perfectly, right as the county was undergoing a routine software transition in their permitting system. Her complaint landed in a limbo of technical confusion, and some low-level bureaucrat pushed a panic button. That's all it took. Within 48 hours, I received a temporary suspension on my agricultural handling permits. No handling meant no processing. No processing meant no transport. No transport meant no food. And the effect was immediate. My trucks stopped rolling. Orders queued up in distribution software, undeliverable. Pallets of vegetables rotted in coolers. Store shelves in 3 zip codes began to thin, especially in the HOA zones Karen called home. At first, it wasn't obvious. One missing shipment of pasture-raised eggs. A delay in organic lettuce. But within days, things escalated. Managers at the boutique grocer off Highview Lane sent frantic emails demanding updates. ETA on Dairy Crate B947. Are we getting our Saturday delivery or not? We've had to cancel 2 school lunch contracts. Please advise. Their dependence on just-in-time logistics had blinded them. They didn't store food. They relied on flow. And I was the flow. Meanwhile, the HOA residents started murmuring. Their weekly deliveries were late. Their preferred labels weren't available. Karen issued a community memo blaming supply chain disruptions due to non-compliant vendors, but that only fueled more suspicion. A viral post on the Meadowlark Moms group read, "Why does every store within our district seem to be the only ones running out of food? Is this sabotage?" But Karen wasn't done. Still puffed up from her media attention, she gave an interview to Channel 4 where she called me a rogue agitator weaponizing agriculture to manipulate the community. She stood at the gates of Meadowlark Crest with 2 HOA guards behind her. wearing aviators like they were military brass. "We will not be bullied," she said into the camera. "We will not yield to intimidation. The HOA model will not be threatened by one man playing farmer and warlord." That quote did it. That quote was the final key. Because now she had accused me publicly, on air, of an intent to manipulate the food supply. I clipped it, downloaded the footage, filed it into the Project Soil Lock folder. And then I did what Karen had feared from the beginning. I flipped the switch. That night, from a simple laptop in a trailer parked exactly 300 feet outside my farm's north property line, just far enough to be outside of HOA residency enforcement, I initiated the first cascade. Warehouse lights dimmed in 3 counties as I executed contract freezes on my logistics software. Distribution nodes rerouted to standby. Truck shipments were halted. Inventory software flagged shortages in over 20 supermarkets. Every operation tied to my LLCs, Suncrest Syndicate, Hollow Ridge Ag, Blackroot Grain, ceased all outgoing transfers under a single, unified reason code. Zoning Compliance Review. The beauty of it was that it wasn't sabotage. It was policy, perfectly legal. The kind of move Karen would never understand because she never bothered to ask what those warehouses were. She thought they were just farm storage units, but they were federal-grade food infrastructure nodes tied to disaster supply chains, school lunch programs, and state-level emergency response contracts. I'd built them over a decade with a level of operational discipline Karen couldn't spell, and now they were quiet, still, purposefully dead. Within 72 hours, Karen's world began to unravel. Parents reported empty school lunch trays. Cafes closed early due to lack of produce. Even the golf club had to cancel its Friday buffet, citing vendor issues. The HOA board panicked. They held a closed-door emergency meeting and issued a written demand to restore services immediately or face formal litigation. I sent back a single-page response through my attorney. The supply halt is in compliance with the temporary permit suspension initiated by your organization's zoning complaint. As soon as permits are cleared, services will resume. Simple, clean, legally bulletproof. Karen began calling county offices daily, demanding the audit be reversed. But audits don't reverse on demand. Not when you've created a paper trail that makes it look like a real violation. And not when every county official is now being asked, on record, whether they were pressured by an HOA to interfere with private agricultural business. Meanwhile, I sat in my trailer, quiet, watching. Drinking coffee brewed with water filtered from my own well. I had power, I had internet, I had my farm within view, and eyes on every entrance through motion detectors and live drones. Every day that passed, the HOA grew more desperate. They sent another compliance officer to the edge of my property, who stood like a scarecrow, trying to wave down trucks that weren't coming. I watched him pace for 6 hours before he finally gave up and drove off. Karen, for all her bravado, finally went silent. No more interviews, no more memos. Word leaked that the county was investigating the HOA for overreach resulting in regional resource disruption. And still, I didn't say a word. I let the silence speak. Let the empty store shelves scream. Let the rising panic of grocery managers, ones who used to ignore my name, turn into fear and then apology. They began emailing again. "We understand this is out of your control. Please let us know how we can help." Some even offered to call the zoning board themselves. A supplier from the neighboring county offered me triple for a contract rewrite. "You're the only one who gets it done," he said. "Let them burn. We'll feed the rest." I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the longer I waited, the deeper Karen's hole got. And behind the scenes, I was already finalizing the blueprint for the final act. A strike that wouldn't just shut down food. It would shut down her permanently. All I needed was one more trigger. And something told me Karen was about to pull it. It began with the ice cream, or rather, the lack of it. Meadowlark Crest's fancy artisan grocer, the Golden Basket, posted a handwritten sign on its front door that read, "Due to unexpected delivery complications, all frozen goods are currently unavailable." One sign turned into 5, then 10. By the end of the week, parents were driving 40 miles out just to find formula and cereal. Meat shelves sat barren. Bread aisles echoed. The HOA issued bulletin boards, once covered in garage sale flyers, were now plastered with complaints. Why hasn't anyone fixed this? Where's the food? Who's responsible? Karen tried to maintain the facade. She issued a statement calling the shortages temporary complications stemming from an ongoing compliance matter with a former resident. Former resident. That one made me smile. I was still in that trailer, less than a stone's throw from my own kitchen, watching her empire choke on its own arrogance. What she didn't realize was that every attempt to pin this on me only made it worse, because now everyone was starting to ask questions. Questions the HOA couldn't answer without unearthing the truth. Residents began calling the county directly, and the county, now under pressure, launched its own inquiry into her. The moment federal eyes landed on Meadowlark Crest, the real panic started. Karen summoned a closed-door emergency board session and begged the county to expedite the zoning audit she herself had triggered weeks ago. She claimed it was a national security matter. The clerk laughed in her face. You tied your community's food supply to an independent agricultural operation and then tried to evict the man who runs it. We're auditing you now. Her voice cracked under pressure, trying to wrangle whatever allies she had left, but most were already backing away. Because she'd lost the one thing even a power-drunk HOA dictator couldn't afford to lose: control. What came next was a sequence of strikes I'd spent weeks preparing, each one cleaner than the last. The first was a cease and desist letter delivered to the HOA's lawyer, served by my attorney, a federal contract specialist with a decade of experience handling government infrastructure disputes. It outlined, in surgical legal language, that the HOA had interfered with essential services protected under both state agricultural statutes and federal food distribution laws. Interfering with those services wasn't just harassment. It was a violation of commerce law, a felony. Strike 2 came 48 hours later, when I filed a civil suit backed by a stack of evidence the size of a hay bale: trespassing, defamation, unauthorized surveillance, illegal zoning interference, attempted displacement, and slander. Attached was the full video of Karen's Channel 4 interview, annotated with timestamps and cross-referenced with the HOA's bylaws and her own recorded statements. I didn't just throw the book at her, I bound her in it. But the final strike, the one that broke the dam, came from the judge. Judge Rothwell, a no-nonsense Vietnam vet with a legal mind like a buzzsaw, read the filings, reviewed the footage, and issued a blistering injunction against Meadowlark Crest HOA. His statement was as lethal as it was poetic. The actions taken by the HOA and its leadership are not only in violation of county statutes, but constitute a reckless abuse of civil authority. The defendant was unlawfully targeted, his property rights infringed upon, and his livelihood jeopardized under the guise of neighborhood order. This court finds such conduct not only illegal but morally reprehensible. I wasn't in the courtroom when he read that aloud, but I watched the recording that night on my projector screen. I watched it twice. Karen didn't speak when the ruling came down, not a word. She just sat there, shoulders high, lips pursed so tightly they turned white. Within 24 hours, the HOA board members held a vote of no confidence. She was out. Gone. Resigned due to health concerns, in a 3-line email sent to residents that no one believed. She vanished from the community, from the neighborhood app, from public view altogether. Rumor had it she moved to a gated enclave 2 counties over and changed her last name. I never cared enough to check. I had other things to tend to. The following week, I stood on my porch. Not the trailer, my porch. My house. Back where I belonged. The morning mist still hung low over the rows of kale and carrots, and the air smelled of fresh hay and scorched arrogance. The first convoy rolled in at 9:17 a.m. 3 semis, headlights shining through the fog like returning warships, each one flanked by a county sheriff cruiser, not to harass, but to escort. One deputy even tipped his hat as they passed through the gate. Glad to see you back where you belong, Mr. Holt, he said. I nodded. Me too. Behind them came trucks from the surrounding farms, partners who had stood by me during the blockade. We formed a line, unloading crates of produce, dairy, meat, all tagged and routed by the hour. Operations resumed like nothing had ever stopped. But something had changed. Not everyone got a delivery. The contracts I reinstated were selective. Stores that stood by me during the audit, fully stocked. Schools that tried to cancel agreements moved to the bottom of the list. HOA districts like Meadowlark, they waited. They got what was left when it was left. Some vendors begged. Some threatened. I ignored both. Because respect isn't free. You either have it, or you lose access to the hand that feeds you. And I was the hand now. I walked the perimeter of my land that evening, boots in the soil, eyes on the horizon. The wind carried a quiet peace. No drones overhead. No security trespassers. No HOA clipboards scribbling lies. Just rows of vegetables humming with life, cattle in the distance, and the faint sound of logistics whirring back to life. I passed by the old burn barrel, where I'd torched the first violation notice weeks ago. All that remained was ash. Appropriate. I took my coffee back to the porch and sat in the same chair I'd sat in when this all began. Same view, same land. But everything was different. The system had tried to break me, but I broke the system first. And the lesson was now carved into every yard of this land. Never pick a fight with the man who grows your food. Because revenge doesn't always come with fists. Sometimes it comes with silence, with patience, and with the sound of your shelves going empty.